What if I told you that everything you've always believed about the lives of aristocratic women is a complete lie? Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to shatter stereotypes and talk about what historical novels tactfully leave out. Behind the glittering facades of huge mansions, expensive jewelry, and society smiles lay an incredibly harsh and at times cruel economic reality. In a world of strict social rules and rigid patriarchy, the loss of a husband was not just a personal tragedy. It instantly and mercilessly changed a high society woman's status, literally knocking her off her pedestal. Just imagine this nightmare. Yesterday's powerful mistress of a vast estate could lose all her comforts, privileges, and financial stability in a single day. If you also think historical injustice is a great topic to explore, give this video a big thumbs up right now, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new historical investigations. In today's episode, we'll break down the mechanisms of inheritance that left women with nothing in as much detail as possible and in simple language. We'll explore the absurd rules of changing one's place of residence and the harsh unspoken laws of survival in the era of strict Victorian norms. I guarantee this information will blow your mind. Be sure to watch this video all the way to the end, and you'll learn an incredible fact: how a simple piece of black fabric became a woman's primary tool for protection against society's attacks, and why a humiliating move from her beloved home was absolutely inevitable for her. Pour yourself some coffee, get comfortable. Let's go. Are you ready for the shocking truth? The transfer of property took place instantly and without the slightest delay on the part of the law. All of the family's bank accounts were immediately frozen by lawyers before the official documents were even announced. The widow lost the right to manage the funds that had, just yesterday, supported a massive household. Control over the finances passed entirely into the hands of older relatives or appointed guardians. The vast mansions required constant investment in repairs and the wages of the servants. The woman could no longer pay the bills from butchers, greengrocers, and tailors. Trusted individuals conducted a full inventory of silver, furniture, and expensive textiles. Every vase and every painting in the house was meticulously recorded by strict clerks in long lists. The former mistress became merely a temporary guest within the walls of her own estate. The estate was being prepared for transfer to its new male legal owner. Often this heir turned out to be a distant relative whom the woman had seen only a couple of times. He arrived at the estate with his stewards and established a new order. The servants began to obey the new people, ignoring the requests of the former mistress. The entire established way of life was destroyed literally within a few days of the heir's arrival. The woman was allocated only a strictly stipulated sum set forth in the marriage contract many years earlier. This sum often did not account for inflation or changes in the country's price levels. Payments were made in installments, once a quarter or once every 6 months. Delays in payments by the managers of the new estate were a common occurrence. Widows had to write letters requesting that the money owed to them by law be sent. Many women faced the necessity of keeping strict accounts for the first time in their lives. They had to start special notebooks to record every penny spent. Expenses for coal, candles, and basic foodstuffs were carefully calculated in the evenings. Trips in hired carriages were replaced by long walks through the city streets. A taste for luxury was quickly replaced by a regime of strict and constant frugality. Giving up a private carriage was the first sign of financial decline. Selling expensive carriages and dismissing the coachman became a public declaration of a change in status. City residents immediately noticed the absence of a liveried carriage at the mansion's door. Former acquaintances began to pretend not to notice the woman walking on foot. Society quickly struck from its lists those who were losing their financial influence. The process of taking inventory of property took many months of painstaking work. Lawyers searched attics, basements, and storerooms for unaccounted for valuables. Every chair and every rug was assigned a serial number in thick ledgers. The woman was forbidden from removing from the house any items that were not part of her personal dowry. Even her favorite books and writing supplies could turn out to be someone else's property. The transition to austerity forced a complete overhaul of the daily menu. Expensive wines and exotic fruits disappeared forever from the widow's table. Instead of formal dinners with 7 courses, simple and hearty food was served. The number of servants was reduced to a single cook and a simple maid. The vast kitchens of the mansion stood empty, giving way to small rooms in the new modest dwellings. The credit system in shops also underwent significant changes. Merchants refused to sell goods on credit without guarantees from the new estate owner. Widows had to pay cash for every item or product they purchased. This created additional difficulties when quarterly payments from the estate managers were delayed. Society's trust in a single woman's creditworthiness was virtually non-existent. We'd love to hear your perspective. What do you think about such a drastic deprivation of all financial rights? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion will help us better understand the economic realities of that era. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. What we found in the old archives completely changes our understanding of that era. The legal system of that time operated exclusively in the interests of men and the preservation of large capital. Marriage contracts were drawn up in such a way as to protect the main property from division. A woman was merely a temporary beneficiary of the benefits afforded by her status as a wife. Upon the loss of her spouse, her rights to land ownership were automatically revoked. A woman's legal status was completely subsumed into her husband's upon marriage. This principle meant a complete loss of personal independence in all legal matters. A single widow suddenly regained some of these lost rights. She could once again sign contracts and manage a small allowance in her own name. However, this independence was often accompanied by a complete lack of real means of subsistence. A complex system of trusteeship was established to protect family estates from ruin. Special boards of trustees monitored every financial move a single woman made. She could not sell even a small portion of the land without their written consent. Any investment required lengthy negotiations with an entire army of hired lawyers. The process of obtaining her own money turned into an endless bureaucratic ordeal. Documents were drawn up on thick parchment paper with numerous wax seals. Reading these contracts required an excellent knowledge of complex legal terminology. Most women did not receive the necessary education to understand such papers. They had to hire their own lawyers to decipher every clause of the contract. Paying for these professional services ate up a significant portion of their already modest income. The law severely punished any attempts to conceal property from inventory. Concealing silver spoons or jewelry carried the threat of actual criminal prosecution. Bailiffs had the right to search the widow's private rooms. They checked jewelry boxes, dressers, and hiding places in search of undeclared valuables. The atmosphere of constant suspicion destroyed what remained of the former respect in the home. The struggle for one's share of the estate could drag on for years of legal proceedings. The highest courts were located in the capital, which required additional travel expenses. Women had to rent cheap rooms near the courthouses. They would sit for hours in cold hallways, waiting to be called before the judge. Many gave up the fight, unable to withstand the enormous financial and emotional pressure. The law regarding married women's property began to change only toward the end of the era. Until then, the entire system was geared toward preserving wealth within the male line of the family. Land was considered the primary asset, one that could not be divided into smaller parcels. Plots were passed down to the eldest male, preserving the integrity of vast agricultural estates. A woman's share always consisted solely of cash or government bonds. Bonds yielded a stable but very low annual return. Inflation gradually eroded the purchasing power of these securities. Selling bonds before maturity was extremely unprofitable due to high commissions. Women found themselves trapped in a guaranteed but constantly shrinking budget. They had to cut back on their needs more and more each year. Legal isolation was compounded by a complete lack of support from the state. There were no social programs or pensions for women of high society. Charitable foundations helped only the poorest segments of the urban population. A single lady had to find her own ways to survive within the law. In the next chapter, you will learn how these women coped with strict dress codes and turned their wardrobes into a tool for self-protection. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about lies in the details of the wardrobe. The production of mourning attire was a massive and incredibly profitable business at the time. Factories produced hundreds of meters of special matte crepe every day. This fabric did not reflect light and visually emphasize the wearer's social status. The choice of material was strictly regulated by rules and allowed for no deviations. For the first year and one day, a woman was required to wear only black clothing. Dresses were made of heavy bombazine, which collected dust and was extremely heavy. Her face was hidden beneath a thick veil that fell below her waist. This veil protected her from prying eyes during her rare outings. She was permitted to remove it only within the walls of her own home, in the presence of her loved ones. The fabrics used for dresses were specially treated with chemical solutions to remove any sheen. These solutions often had a strong odor and caused skin irritation. Heavy skirts restricted movement and turned long walks into an ordeal. In the summer heat, the thick black fabric would heat up, creating unbearable conditions. Women were forced to endure this discomfort in order to conform to social norms. Any jewelry made of gold, silver, or precious stones was strictly forbidden. Only modest brooches made of black jet or matte onyx were permitted. Medallions in which mementos or portraits were kept became popular. These pieces of jewelry were not cheap, creating a new expense for impoverished women. The lack of proper accessories drew immediate condemnation from neighbors. The transition to semi-mourning did not occur until 24 long months had passed. Dark gray, lilac, and muted purple shades gradually appeared in the wardrobe. Fabrics became lighter, and the use of silk with a matte sheen was permitted. The veil was shortened and swept back, revealing the woman's face to the world. This transition was strictly monitored by the entire local community. The change in wardrobe required a complete overhaul of the closets every few months. It was forbidden to alter old, brightly colored dresses or use them at home. They had to be given to the poor or sold to second-hand dealers for a pittance. Buying new bolts of bombazine and crepe dealt a serious blow to the budget. Seamstresses charged double for rush orders of black clothing. Specialty stores sold everything needed to comply with the rules in one place. Huge halls displayed black fans, umbrellas, gloves, and even handkerchiefs with black borders. Salespeople in these stores spoke in hushed tones and wore austere suits. Shopping became a somber ritual that cemented a woman's new status. These department stores reaped enormous profits from the observance of social traditions. Footwear was also subject to strict rules of absolute matte finish. It was forbidden to wear patent leather shoes or those with shiny buckles. Only soft black suede or matte fabric on a thick sole was permitted. Such shoes quickly fell into disrepair during frequent walks on muddy streets. Constant shoe repairs became a regular item in the household budget. Even the undergarments hidden beneath heavy dresses had to be appropriate for the occasion. White lace was replaced by simple, plain fabrics without unnecessary embellishments. Black ribbons were woven into the hair instead of bright hairpins and combs. Every element of her appearance underwent a strict inspection before she left the house. Be sure to like this video if this information was new to you. I discovered this by chance while studying old ledgers. Having lost their main source of income, widows began secretly selling off their personal belongings. Jewelry was the first to be taken to pawn shops under the cover of darkness. Heavy velvet dresses were altered or sold to second-hand clothing dealers. Every item sold made it possible to pay the rent on a modest dwelling for another month. The second-hand trade flourished in the working-class neighborhoods of large cities. Buyers would come to the back doors of houses so as not to attract the neighbors' attention. Items were appraised quickly and always to the seller's disadvantage. Women agreed to any amount just to get some much-needed cash. Pride gave way to the need to buy firewood and pay the baker's bills. Renting out rooms became a popular way for impoverished ladies to earn money. Large apartments were divided into cramped cubicles using wooden partitions. Clerks, students, and low-level employees moved into these rooms. The former mistress of the estate transformed into the strict proprietress of a cheap boarding house. She personally kept the hallways clean and collected rent from the tenants on Fridays. Saving on heating was an absolute necessity during the cold winters. Fireplaces were lit in only one room, where all the residents of the house gathered. Expensive coal briquettes were replaced with cheap peat or wood scraps. Women would layer on several warm sweaters to keep from freezing. The temperature in the bedrooms often dropped to critically low levels. Feeding the boarders became a separate survival skill for the housewife. Meat trimmings were bought at the markets late in the evening, just before the shops closed. These were used to make thick, hearty soups with the addition of cheap root vegetables and grains. They baked their own bread, saving money on city bakeries. Tea was brewed multiple times until the water became completely clear. The ability to haggle at the markets became a vital skill. Women in black clothes methodically walked the aisles, selecting the cheapest produce. They learned to judge the freshness of vegetables and the quality of cheap fabric scraps. The vendors knew them by sight and often set aside discounted goods for them at the end of the day. This daily labor demanded enormous physical and mental effort. Keeping the household accounts took up every free evening. Expenses for soap, candles, and matches were calculated with mathematical precision. Every shilling saved was set aside in a tin can for unexpected expenses. Clothes were mended and laundry was darned by the dim light of a single candle. Buying a new item was considered an extraordinary and rare event. Secret loan societies issued small loans secured by silverware. These institutions charged exorbitant interest rates for their services. It was extremely rare to redeem pawned items due to a constant lack of funds. Family spoons and trays remained permanently in pawn shop display cases. This severed the last link to a past life of prosperity. The economy of widowhood was built on a strict calculation and a complete renunciation of pleasures. All energy was spent on maintaining a simple physical existence. Dreams of travel or new books were replaced by thoughts of paying taxes. Life turned into an endless struggle against poverty within four walls. In the next chapter, you will learn how they coped with this terrible social isolation. The rules of etiquette demanded a complete renunciation of any social entertainment. A single woman had no right to attend theater performances or musical evenings. Her daily schedule consisted exclusively of walks in deserted parks and reading letters. Any appearance in society was viewed as a gross violation of moral standards. Visits were limited to only the closest relatives at strictly designated times. Visiting cards became the primary means of communication with the outside world. They were printed on thick white cardstock with a mandatory wide black border. The width of this border strictly corresponded to the stage of mourning and the time that had passed since the loss. Servants delivered these cards to the homes of acquaintances, leaving them on silver trays. Personal meetings were replaced by short notes on special paper with mourning borders. Receiving guests in one's own home was also subject to strict rules. The curtains on the windows remained tightly drawn even on sunny days. Mirrors were covered with thick, dark cloth to prevent the reflection of light. Loud conversations or laughter were not permitted in the living room. The atmosphere was meant to remain solemn, quiet, and utterly joyless. This isolation often led to the loss of most social connections. Former friends stopped sending invitations to dinner parties and balls. The presence of a woman in a black dress was considered a bad omen at festive events. She was gradually forgotten, excluded from guest lists for many years. Her social circle narrowed to a few elderly female relatives and the parish priest. Daily walks were permitted only when accompanied by a lady-in-waiting or a senior maid. Appearing alone on a busy street could spark a wave of sordid rumors. Routes were chosen to avoid fashion boutiques and popular squares. She was to keep her eyes downcast and not engage in conversation with acquaintances. The city turned into an obstacle course that had to be navigated unnoticed. Reading was strictly regulated by public morality. Only religious literature, collections of sermons, and edifying treatises were permitted. Novels, poetry, and fashion magazines were ruthlessly banished from home libraries. Immersion in prayer and contemplation was considered the only proper pursuit. Any sign of interest in secular news was harshly suppressed by older family members. Correspondence remained the only window to the wider world. Women wrote long letters to their few friends, describing their monotonous days. The stationery also had a black border, and the envelopes were sealed with black sealing wax. Postmen became the most welcome guests in these quiet and gloomy homes. Receiving a letter became the highlight of a long and tedious week. Musical instruments in the house were locked away for years. Playing the piano was considered an inappropriate pastime that disturbed the silence of mourning. Sheet music was tucked away in distant cupboards, and the keys were covered in a layer of dust. The silence in the rooms was broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock and the rustling of dresses. The absence of music made the space feel even emptier and colder. Social isolation took a heavy toll on their mental health. Constant loneliness and the prohibition against showing emotions led to deep depression.
I don't know what to do.
The women lost interest in life, completely immersing themselves in the routine of dreary duties. They had no opportunity to discuss their problems with qualified professionals. They were expected to bear their cross in silence and with the utmost dignity. It took many years to emerge from this state, and doing so was an immense struggle. Even after the official end of their sentences, society continued to closely monitor their behavior. A return to normal life was often perceived as an insult to the memory of the past. The women had to balance their desire to live with their fear of public condemnation. Their every action was scrutinized under the magnifying glass of strict Victorian moralists. What the government doesn't want you to know is hidden in old land registry records. Moving out of the main mansion was a mandatory and most painful step for the widow. She was provided with a small house on the outskirts of the estate or a modest city apartment. Transporting her personal belongings took several days and was carried out under the strict supervision of the estate managers. The old servants rarely followed their former mistress to her new, cramped dwelling. The widow's home was usually a small building with poor heating. Often these houses had stood empty for years and required major repairs. Leaky roofs and drafts became constant companions in her new life. There was a catastrophic lack of funds to repair leaky pipes or replace old windows. Women had to seal the cracks themselves and set out basins during rainstorms. The responsibility for organizing their new daily life fell on the shoulders of women unaccustomed to physical labor. They had to learn how to light the stove and clean the chimneys. Buying groceries at local markets replaced having goods delivered right to the mansion's door. Mopping floors and washing heavy laundry took up most of the daylight hours. Hands accustomed to delicate lace quickly became rough from lye soap and hard water. City apartments presented an even more depressing sight. Narrow staircases, a lack of sufficient light, and the constant noise of the streets weighed heavily on the psyche. Neighbors were low-level clerks and impoverished merchants. Smells from other people's kitchens constantly seeped through the thin walls of cheap houses. The lack of a private garden deprived them of their last chance to breathe fresh air. Under these new conditions, people had to give up many of their familiar furnishings. Bulky oak wardrobes and huge mirrors simply wouldn't fit in the cramped rooms. They had to be sold for a pittance to local furniture dealers. The space was filled with simple chairs and narrow iron beds. Coziness was created with the help of cheap calico curtains and homemade rugs. The lack of servants changed the entire daily routine. The day began at dawn so they could stoke the stove before the cold set in. Water had to be carried in heavy buckets from street hydrants. Ironing clothes with heavy cast iron irons drained their last bit of energy in the evenings. Fatigue became a constant backdrop to all daily thoughts and actions. Many women tried to maintain the appearance of their former lives under the new conditions. They kept a few silver spoons for Sunday tea parties. Old porcelain cups were carefully glued back together at the slightest sign of a crack. Preserved linen tablecloths with family monograms were spread over cheap tables. These small details helped preserve what remained of their pride in the face of extreme poverty. Relationships with neighbors were built with great caution. Residents of poor neighborhoods viewed impoverished aristocratic women with suspicion. Differences in upbringing and speech created an invisible but solid wall. The women tried to avoid unnecessary contact so as not to become the subject of gossip. Withdrawal became the best defense against prying curiosity. Transportation expenses were kept to an absolute minimum. Rides on omnibuses were permitted only in cases of extreme necessity. Long distances were covered on foot in any weather. Worn-out shoes and soaked skirts became a common sight during London's rainy seasons. Health rapidly deteriorated due to constant colds and a lack of warm clothing. In the next chapter, you will learn how they coped with these harsh living conditions. The legal status of a free woman brought many unexpected problems. Having gained the right to sign documents, widows became targets for swindlers of all kinds.
I'm so sorry, madam.
Cunning businessmen offered to invest their last savings in dubious ventures. They promised huge returns from the construction of new railroads or factories. Gullible ladies with no financial experience readily handed over their meager capital. Losing all their money as a result of such schemes was commonplace. The laws of the time offered little protection to investors against outright fraud. Bankrupt firms simply closed their doors, leaving investors without a single penny. Women had to turn to the police, where their cases were investigated for months without result. Their attempt to gain financial independence ended in complete failure.
Your statement has been...
The lack of male protection left them vulnerable to landlords. Owners of cheap apartments often raised the rent without any warning. The slightest delay in payment resulted in immediate eviction onto the street with confiscation of belongings. Arguing with landlords was futile and legally hopeless. The fear of ending up without a roof over their heads haunted every single female tenant. Working with hired lawyers also offered no guarantee of security. Many lawyers deliberately dragged out cases to charge more for their services. They drafted complex documents, confusing their clients with legal jargon. It was practically impossible to make sense of the bills from law firms. Defending one's rights ended up costing more than the original amount in dispute. The problem of finding reliable sources of information was acute. Newspapers often published paid articles praising pyramid schemes. There was no one to ask for advice, as one's social circle was extremely limited. One had to make decisions blindly, relying solely on intuition. Mistakes were too costly in the world of harsh Victorian capitalism. Managing even a small amount of one's own capital required iron discipline. Government securities remained the only safe, but extremely low-yielding investment. To survive on that interest, one had to live like a nun. Every purchase beyond the bare minimum tore a hole in the annual budget. Independence turned out to be synonymous with constant and severe hardship. Some tried to open their own small businesses. They rented spaces for hat workshops or small tea shops. However, competition in the cities was fierce, and taxes ate up most of the profits. Running a business required a toughness that was not taught in boarding schools for young ladies of noble birth. Most such ventures closed within the first year of operation. Pressure from relatives also did not let up. Older brothers or nephews constantly offered unsolicited advice on how to run the business. They demanded full accounts of expenses, threatening to withhold their symbolic support. Women had to defend their decisions in constant disputes with their kin. They had to prove their right to independence every single day. This struggle toughened their character, transforming timid ladies into tough managers. They learned to read between the lines of contracts and haggle over every shilling. Gentle manners gave way to business acumen and suspicion. Illusions about the way the world worked were quickly shattered by the onslaught of reality. Only those who could quickly adapt to the harsh rules of the market survived.
Mind your cart, sir.
Society created unbearable conditions for any unmarried woman. Strict moralists watched every move a single woman made in the city. The slightest deviation from the norms of behavior sparked a wave of destructive gossip.
It's a disgrace. She'll ruin everything.
Stopping to talk to a man on the street was considered a scandalous incident. Rumors spread like wildfire throughout the entire neighborhood. Absolutely everything was subject to condemnation, from the color of gloves to the choice of groceries at the market. Buying expensive pastries or a bottle of fine wine was considered a sign of excessive luxury.
Exactly. Who does she think she is?
Neighbors closely watched who came to the house and at what time they left. Mail carriers were often bribed to reveal the recipients of outgoing letters. Life turned into an endless existence under a magnifying glass. Renting rooms to male tenants aroused particular interest among gossips. Women were accused of indecent behavior without the slightest evidence. They had to impose the strictest rules on their tenants to avoid gossip. Any meetings on the stairs or conversations in the boarding house corridors were forbidden. Reputation was the only intangible asset that needed to be protected. Religion also became a tool of control. Widows were expected to spend their days attending church services and praying. Missing Sunday Mass was considered a sign of moral decline. Priests often made public remarks to parishioners whose behavior they deemed insufficiently mournful. The church dictated its strict laws, leaving no room for personal space. Fear of gossip forced women to hide any attempts to earn money. Manual labor was considered humiliating for a lady of good society. Custom embroidery or copying documents was done late at night behind tightly drawn curtains.
Focus. We must finish this.
Finished items were delivered to clients through intermediaries to conceal the artisan's name. Poverty was far more easily forgiven by society than honest physical labor. Friendship with married women also became impossible. Wives saw single women as a potential threat to their marriages. They were no longer invited even to modest tea parties at home. This isolation was compounded by suspicion and mistrust from former friends. The only people left to socialize with were other outcasts who had lost their status. Men often allowed themselves to be overly familiar in ways they would never have dared in the presence of a husband. Market vendors might overcharge or be rude to a defenseless female customer. The absence of male protection made a woman an easy target for everyday rudeness. Responding to insults was forbidden by the rules of propriety. They had to endure the humiliation in silence, gritting their teeth. Newspapers of the time often published caricatures of aging, single ladies. They were portrayed as greedy, cantankerous, and comical characters. This stereotype was firmly entrenched in the collective consciousness of the Victorian era. It was practically impossible to avoid ridicule, even with impeccable behavior. Society demanded that they remain invisible, yet constantly dragged them into the spotlight for condemnation. Only incredible inner strength helped them withstand such pressure. Women learned to ignore the whispers behind their backs and the sidelong glances on the streets. They created an invisible armor around themselves, made of cold indifference and strict manners. A proud posture and a thick black veil became the best response to all the gossip. Their survival depended on their ability to tune out the cruel opinions of the crowd.
Quality goods. Fresh pies. Get 'em while they're hot.
Survival required finding unconventional ways to supplement their income. When there was nothing left to sell, the women turned to their hidden talents.
Just a few more rows. Be careful.
The ability to write beautifully and knowledge of several languages became a true lifeline. They secretly took on commissions to translate commercial documents or transcribe manuscripts. This work paid very little, but it allowed them to buy coal and bread.
Warm, savory pies, piping hot for the cold.
Many ladies possessed excellent sewing and embroidery skills. Delicate work on silk or the creation of intricate lace was highly valued in fashion boutiques. Entire days were spent at the embroidery frame by the dim light streaming through small windows. Their eyes grew tired quickly, and their fingers were pricked by needles until they bled. However, this craft provided a steady income that could be kept hidden from nosy neighbors. Some tried their hand at writing. They wrote short stories or poems for cheap pulp magazines. Their work was always published under male pseudonyms or initials. Editors paid a pittance for such texts, but the demand for sentimental stories was high. Writing at night became a second secret life for many impoverished aristocratic women. Making artificial flowers from wax and fabric also brought in a small income. These intricate arrangements were bought to decorate interiors or hats. The work required precision and a good knowledge of botany. Materials were expensive, so the profit from selling such crafts was minimal. Rooms turned into small cottage workshops, cluttered with scraps of fabric and wire. Painting porcelain and ceramics was another accessible craft. Blanks were purchased from factories, painted at home, and sold to middlemen. Fine brushes and toxic paints required careful handling in cramped spaces. The finished plates and vases were sold in tableware stores at inflated prices. The artists themselves received only a tiny percentage of the item's actual value. Managing apartment buildings became a real profession for the most enterprising. After saving up a little money, they rented large buildings and sublet them in sections. This required strict oversight of repairs and timely rent payments from tenants. They had to hire assistants to collect debts and clean the stairwells. Such activities walked a fine line with public morality, but generated a good income. Homemade medicines and ointments made from old recipes found their buyers. Herbal mixtures and tinctures were sold through pharmacist acquaintances. The secrets of preparation were passed down from generation to generation and now served as a means of survival. Kitchens turned into veritable chemistry labs with a multitude of flasks and mortars. Buyers valued natural concoctions over factory-made pills. Bookbinding was also taken up by single women. Working with thick cardboard, leather, and glue was hard and messy. Books were restored for second-hand bookstores and private collectors. The strong smell of wood glue permanently permeated clothing and furniture. But this work did not require leaving the house and allowed one to remain incognito. All these occupations were united by a strict necessity for secrecy. Society would never have accepted a woman from a good family engaging in a trade. Physical labor shattered the illusion of class superiority in the Victorian system. They worked in the shadows, creating a vast hidden market for services and goods. Their perseverance and hard work allowed many to escape utter poverty and starvation.
The streets are dreadful today. I know.
Over time, old ties were finally severed. Women began to form new social circles based on mutual aid and shared problems. They met while waiting in line to see lawyers or in cheap shops. Their shared fate quickly erased former class distinctions. A former countess might have tea with the widow of a lowly bank clerk. These new communities existed hidden from prying eyes. Women exchanged addresses of inexpensive seamstresses and reliable second-hand dealers. They lent each other small sums of money until their quarterly payments arrived. Together, they bought wholesale shipments of coal and flour, which worked out significantly cheaper. It was a true network of solidarity in the harsh world of capitalism. Charitable activities in the parishes became an important venue for socializing. Joint efforts to collect warm clothing for the poor or organize church bazaars brought people closer together. In this environment, their status as widows commanded respect rather than contempt. Organizing aid for others helped them forget their own hardships. Church committees replaced the secular salons they had lost. Reading books aloud in small circles became a popular pastime. They gathered in the evenings in one of the apartments, conserving candles and firewood. One woman would read aloud from an approved novel while the others did needlework. These evenings provided a sense of safety and domestic comfort. Discussions about what they had read replaced empty social gossip.
Perhaps we should discuss it.
Joint walks also became the norm for the new friends. Two women in black attracted less negative attention on the streets than a lone lady. They accompanied each other to offices, courts, and markets. Having a companion protected them from the rudeness of merchants and pushy passers-by. This mutual support made getting around the city much safer. Illnesses were easier to bear thanks to the support of their new social circle. Friends took turns keeping vigil at the sick woman's bedside, bringing broth and hot tea. They could not afford to pay for professional nurses. They performed all medical procedures themselves and bought medicines. This sincere care often saved lives in the cold and damp apartments.
Need a pinch more.
An interest in politics and social reform was born precisely in such circles. Discussions of unjust property laws led them to reflect on women's rights. They secretly read political pamphlets and articles by economists. Their life experiences proved the failure of a system built exclusively by men. Many of them later became active advocates for legislative change. Over the years, these women evolved into independent and self-assured individuals. The illusions of youth were replaced by harsh pragmatism and a knack for managing money. They no longer waited for help from older relatives or benefactors. Their independence was bought at the cost of immense hardship and hard labor. Black dresses, once a symbol of mourning, became the uniform of strong and independent fighters for survival. The Victorian system tried to break them by depriving them of finances and social status, but the need to survive awakened hidden talents and incredible resilience within them. They created their own parallel economy and social structure. Their story is not only a tale of poverty, but also a testament to immense human willpower.
Out of the way, I need...
We have seen that behind the beautiful historical facades lay a cruel system of restrictions. A widow's life became a true school of survival, where every day demanded strict frugality and adherence to harsh rules. However, this very process shaped surprisingly strong and independent individuals, capable of withstanding the pressure of an entire era. Do you think you could cope with such harsh social and economic conditions? Suggest topics in the comments for future videos you'd like to see on our channel, such as the history of swindlers of that time or economic crises. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes.